Love and marriage are connected in our society. They go a long, long way back. Of course, Joseph Campbell, the fellow that you studied often because Duncan Littlefair was a great friend of his, once observed that when people get married, they think it's a long-time love affair, but they'll be divorced pretty soon because all love affairs end in disappointment. Marriage is a recognition of a spiritual identity. So maybe this connection between love and marriage isn't quite as automatic as we think it is. Maybe, shall we say, it's the lost leader. It's the thing that gets you in the door, as it were. You know, Scott Peck, the rather cheeky philosopher, psychologist, the Road Not Taken fellow, I heard him speak once, and I've looked it up and never seen him say it in print, but I distinctly remember him saying that there are only two good reasons to get married, and that's children and friction. And he was serious about both of them. And he said two good reasons to get married, which leaves a whole world for lousy reasons to get married. W.H. Auden, that fine fellow, observed that like everything which is not the involuntary result of fleeting emotion, any marriage, happy or unhappy, is infinitely more interesting than any romance, however passionate. So this love and marriage thing, it's been prompting people to talk about things for a very long time. And I want to explore this a little bit, this marriage thing, because it's one of the great decisions most of us face, whether to get married or not, or wanting to get married and being unable to. And like the song that says it goes together like a horse and carriage, how many of you have seen a horse and carriage recently? So we know it's a dated reference all by itself. So maybe marriage is changing, and we should look at that. And I want to observe at the outset right now that most of the time Tina Turner was very right to ask about life in general, but I'm going to say she was right to ask the question, what's love got to do with it when it comes to marriage? Because it is, as Campbell noticed, primarily a spiritual question. I'm going to do this from a clergy perspective because you see, clergy, we see lots of people getting married all the time. And in fact, when you're a new clergy person, you love doing weddings. Oh, we love doing weddings. That's because we get to get the fancy robe on and we get to sign the official license and we get to feel very powerful indeed. It's the most official thing we do, in fact. So when you're a brand new clergy person, you feel extremely important when you get to sign a marriage license. Well, I've been at this now for about 33 years, and I think I've done at least 150 ceremonies. I haven't kept strict count, and they do blend together after a while, I have to tell you. But I got to tell you also that after 30 years of doing wedding ceremonies, I don't do very many anymore, and that's a choice. And I'm going to tell you why. In fact, the rest of my sermon can tell you why I don't do as many weddings as I have done in the past. And in fact, let's call the rest of this sermon 3 weddings and a funeral. Because in fact, I'm going to tell you 4 different stories. The first story, she came to my church on her own, a visitor who came to one of those newcomer things all churches have. And she joined very quickly within a month, and I saw her regularly in church weeks after that. And not long after that, maybe 2 months, she came to say she was engaged. I was excited for her. She was excited for her. She wanted me to do the ceremony. I was delighted, of course. And so she brought in her fiancé to introduce me so we could plan the wedding. He arrived and was very quick to tell me that he was a very well-educated theologian himself and started throwing around words and mispronouncing them very officially. He was a convert to Eastern Orthodoxy, so I could tell he was passionate about it. And they had gone to the priest, in fact, but he didn't want to do the wedding because his fiancée, the woman joining my church, was not suitable to be getting married in his church. And of course, so that meant they came to me with my low standards and all that. And so, of course, I agreed to help because, yes, I don't believe that religion has much business in stopping people from getting married. I've discovered over the years, after doing lots of premarital counseling, that my track record for successful marriages was neither improved nor reduced by counseling them in advance. They had the same capacity for messing it up, even after I gave them sage advice. And in fact, the few times that I had declined to marry anyone because I thought they were unsuited to marriage, they walked off in a huff and told their friends, and then they never came back again. So I thought I wasn't going to get much out of this practice. People are going to get married. whether I want them to or not. And so I obliged myself and provided a service. And on the day of the service, I was there, and she was there, and he was there, and so were her friends, and so were his family. And just before the ceremony, he hands me a piece of paper and says, I need you to read this when I put on the ring. And it was a very Orthodox, Trinitarian, highly Christian ceremony. I was being ambushed. I looked at the bride, and she nodded sheepishly like, please go along. And so I did. I was obliged to pretend to be something of an Eastern Orthodox priest for the sake of this couple. I complied, because in my world, care trumps correctness. That my desire for their well-being is larger than my insistence on my own rectitude. And so they got married with the words they chose, and I read them aloud. And they never came back to my church. Turned out they were not only glad to have the use of me at a low price and without too much obligation, but we didn't charge nearly as much rent either as the Orthodox Church. Fooled me, I suppose. And it was a legal marriage, absolutely legal. But it was a dishonest marriage from the very get-go. Well, what's honesty got to do with it, to paraphrase Tina Turner? Well, nothing really. Legally, there's no requirement that either party be honest with the other one, except not to be married to someone else at the same time. That's it. How many sad stories do we know of brides and grooms who discovered their bride or groom was telling a tale after the fact? But that doesn't stop them from getting legally married, and it doesn't oblige me to do due diligence or send anyone after them. But exploiting a church and exploiting a minister to get your way tells me that this was not going to be a healthy relationship. And so I feel sad for them, though they are now, in fact, or at least were, legally married. That's the first story. In another story, they were both young this time. Unlike the first couple, they had not been married before, and they were beautiful. Oh, geez, they were beautiful. The woman was beautiful. The man was beautiful. The dress was perfect. The flowers were perfect. The music was perfect. The only thing not perfect at the wedding was me. And one more fact. The groom and the groomsman were drunk. Sneaking a couple of six-packs into the back of the church, they proceeded to drink themselves blind before the ceremony, and I guess to prove their manhood. They were barely able to stand. Everyone knew, not just me. The wilting breath on my face barely kept me from falling down myself. Everyone knew, including the bride, and we went through with it. They're legally married, or they were then. But I got to tell you, I felt hungover afterward. No, they didn't deceive me this time, but it seemed to me ironic, perhaps paradoxical, certainly hypocritical, that just as they were pledging their troth, he was violating it, deceiving himself, deceiving his bride, and everyone close enough to see them wobble as they stood there. I know, irresponsible marriages happen all the time. Mostly it's immaturity, people who don't know the responsibilities of adulthood, who think that being married is about wearing a wonderful dress or getting into tight clothes that you wouldn't wear all the time, or being made a fuss over by caterers, or having lots of pictures and videographers. They think somehow the wedding is the marriage, and they devote all their time and effort to that. The relationship, the part that starts the day after the wedding, I haven't thought about that at all. And so that's two good reasons why I don't do many weddings anymore. The only weddings I will do are those that are worth doing. And that doesn't mean that these are people I've examined. What I mean is they're people to whom I'm connected. They're members of my church, children of my church, grandchildren of my church, maybe friends, colleagues, and now and then, true love. Two Hispanic men came to see me years ago. They didn't know me from Adam, and they didn't want me to know them from Adam, but they knew I was a clergyman, and they knew I would perform weddings for two men. Who knows how they found out? I didn't hang up a sign. This, in fact, would be my third, so to speak, gay wedding, so I thought I was used to it now. Boy, was I wrong. I arrived at their home because we were doing it in the front yard there in the Hispanic neighborhood. So we were surrounded by lots of people and lots of sounds of radios and people outdoors mowing their lawn. I was feeling a little nervous, to be quite honest.